There's this place in the game Little Nightmares that kind of horrified me. Well, actually, this game is filled with horrifying areas. There's nothing little about this nightmare. But the most disturbing moment happens right at the beginning. You wake up in a gloomy woodland, and as you venture deeper into the forest, it becomes increasingly hostile with rolling logs and bear traps hidden beneath the leaves. Eventually, you enter a cabin in the heart of the woods, and that's when things move in an even creepier direction. Inside, the kitchen is a putrid scene of rotting meat and body parts swarming with flies. The owner of this place has an obsession with taxidermy that extends to humans. Worse than that, the attic is hiding a woman that seems to hold the handle you need to escape the cabin. There are some places in games that just stick with you, infiltrating your mind and leaving you with that constant sense that something just doesn't feel right. For me, it was the Hunter's Cabin in Little Nightmares 2 for even more reasons than the ones I just explained, but we're getting ahead of ourselves. The diverse and intriguing worlds of video games can be captivating for a lot of different reasons, and sometimes that reason is a location that simply creeps you out. But why? How do some places have the power to manifest such fear? I know this isn't exactly the most unique perspective, but I believe that the most effective horror in video games transcends jump scares and instead uses environments that exploit our primal fears. Through fear of the unknown, layered narratives, and sound design, let's journey through some of gaming's most terrifying locales and find out what makes them so horrifying. So what makes Little Nightmares so terrifying? I think the answer lies in something deceptively simple: the corruption of the familiar. The game takes everyday, mundane settings, places we associate with safety, routine, or even boredom, and changes them into something unfamiliar. It's not just about creating a scary environment, but about taking something recognizable and warping it into a nightmare. Entering the school location, for example, you'd expect classrooms, desks, and students, which are all there, but not in the way you'd expect. At the head, there's a teacher with a neck that can stretch out like a snake, raising just a couple of questions about the nature of the curriculum. But the eerie part is when you find the same teacher playing piano, implying that somewhere deep down, she's still human and has a passion. Similarly, in the hospital, there's a room with hanging masks on the wall that look a little too real, and a doctor crawling across the ceiling, chasing you through the corridors. When he's eventually lured into a furnace with his rotten flesh burning off, you can take a moment to rest up and warm up your hands. Yeah, no, that isn't disturbing at all. But somehow, that's far from the worst this place has to offer. The doctor has stripped his victims of everything human, leaving them to inhabit mannequin bodies that chase you in a horrific manner in the dark. But by shining a light on them, they suddenly freeze, as if for a moment, they remembered the surgical horrors they had to endure. The world of Little Nightmares is stylized and exaggerated, but they retain a sort of distorted realism to create an uncanny valley effect where things feel familiar yet deeply wrong. It's this unexpectedness that makes the horror so effective. The strange contrast between childlike innocence and horrific content. That's why it always feels like the darker locations from innocent games are the ones that stand out and stay with you. The Legend of Zelda series, for example, sometimes delves into darker themes than its family-friendly design would suggest. The rundown and eerie snow-peak ruins from Twilight Princess, the depths of Tears of the Kingdom, and basically all of Majora's Mask. But it's one area in Ocarina of Time that is generally recognized as more terrifying than any other location in Zelda games. Directly behind a graveyard is an elevated platform that seems to be cut off from the rest of the area, and inside the dimly lit tunnel is a central chamber with a sealed door. When or why this entrance was sealed is unknown, but it's clear that visitors are not welcome here. From the moment you step inside the Shadow Temple, it feels like this place is different. The location is filled with traps like guillotines and moving saw blades, even rotating statues that look like grim reapers holding scythes and falling platforms that are filled with spikes. Based on the bloodstains and rooms built from human remains, it's apparent that many people died here. The dungeons, jail cells, and crypts look like they've gone undisturbed for a long time, which might explain the undead creatures that now live here. Perhaps they are are the restless souls of those who were killed by the dungeon or whoever was responsible for building it. I'd argue that it is for this reason that these zombie-like creatures are perhaps the creepiest enemies in all of Zelda. Their high-pitched screams and hug of death are not only the perfect contrast to the otherwise vibrant world, but a remarkably effective way to weaponize childhood fears. And that's exactly why it works, because it shouldn't be here. Ocarina of Time is a game about heroic adventures in bright forests and grand castles. The Shadow Temple is the complete opposite of that. And I think that's why, when I first played this game as a kid, I handed the controller to my mom and respectfully declined to watch. Noel Carroll's The Philosophy of Horror explains how horror thrives on the unnatural and the paradoxical, which applies perfectly to Little Nightmares and The Legend of Zelda. The mannequin-like victims blend familiarity through human proportions with strange distorted movements, while the childlike protagonist amplify the horror through contrast. Zelda games use unexpected dark elements like Redeads or even the moon from Majora's Mask to freak people out by subverting the series' usual innocent tone. This blending of the familiar and the unnatural is what turns environments into instruments of fear, not just by what they contain, but by how they make us feel as we move through them. Because at the heart of horror is that single moment when control slips away, when you find yourself in unfamiliar territory, face to face with something that cannot be reasoned with, something that simply is, and your only role is to witness it. And in cinema, that's often achieved through grand and unsettling visuals. There's this iconic scene in Alien where the Nostromo crew discovers the derelict spacecraft. Then you see the sheer scale of the alien vessel, the bizarre architecture and the implied history of its inhabitants that all contribute to the feeling of dread that is scarier than any jump scare could ever wish to be. The core of the Tower of Latria in Demon's Souls is also defined by a central set piece. While other areas in the game follow a kind of logical structure, this location is a sprawling spiderweb of suspended towers and narrow pathways. Its prisoners are confined and tortured within the very appropriately named Prison of Hope, waiting to be carried by gargoyles to the upper city, where they are ultimately added to the sea of flesh and blood. This repulsive amalgamation of remains is then consumed by tentacles, which feed a colossal ball of flesh at the tower's heart, where the still beating organ births abominations, each with the face of a former prisoner. Navigating this area means constantly having the sound of a heartbeat that echoes through the surroundings. This bloody set piece is the heart of the horror in the Tower of Latria. While the area itself is frightening, it's the way the environment is crafted to serve and amplify this central image that makes it so memorable. Even when you take the descending elevator towards a blood swamp filled with human remains and the horrifying human-faced monsters, it's the presence of the heart that looms overhead that made it hard for me to forget this place in Demon's Souls. But while Latria horrifies through scale, monsters, and an unspeakable number of medical violations, sometimes horror doesn't need a blood swamp or a still beating heart. Sometimes the entire set piece is just a single hallway. In PT, the entire game is a looping, dimly lit corridor with a dreary wallpaper and flickering lights. There are no chase scenes or boss fights, just one hallway that gradually makes you question your sanity. But as you progress, the hallway changes, slightly, subtly, cruelly. In the first loop, nothing happens, but on the second loop, the radio starts talking about a father murdering his family, and a few loops later, the bathroom door creaks open with a fetus in the sink. But you keep going, because maybe this time there will be answers. And this isn't exactly a modern technique. Perhaps it was most famously used in The Shining. The Overlook Hotel is made up of long, winding corridors that seem to loop in on themselves and are impossible to map. There's nothing inherently frightening about a carpeted hallway until you realize you've seen it before, and you'll see it again. Like PT, the terror doesn't come from what's waiting at the end. It's the liminal space that turns routine into dread. So when developers manipulate the architecture of a level, they're not just building a space, they're designing a psychological trap. The placement of the hallway, the curve of the corner, the presence of a door that won't open, all of it becomes part of a silent conversation with the player's subconscious. And yet somehow, PT achieves all of that with a single, unassuming area. Short for playable teaser, PT was released in 2014 as a mysterious demo for a new Silent Hill game, one that unfortunately never came to be. It was pulled from the PlayStation Store after a fallout between publisher and developer, and even today, it's impossible to play. Navigating a world that corrupts the familiar and fills it with supernatural forces can often be more than a little disorienting. That's why Little Nightmares feels like walking through a childhood memory that's been twisted by something other, where everything is familiar but nothing feels safe. The scale of everything implies a world not built for the protagonist but one they've been shoved into. But that's exactly why the hunter's cabin stands out from the rest, because in a world full of monsters and unnatural design, this place feels almost normal. It doesn't rely on surreal physics or otherworldly horrors. It doesn't need a giant pulsating tower or an infinite hallway. A kitchen with rotting meat and a stuffed family isn't necessarily done through the use of ancient forces. Only the suggestion that one person chose to do this, not because they were possessed, but because they wanted to. In a game where everything is exaggerated and grotesque, the hunter is terrifying because he isn't. The movie Children of Men has this scene early on where the protagonist walks through a refugee camp. There aren't any monsters or overt horror, just an image of a society that has quietly broken. The movie is famous for its extended shots, letting the camera linger while the world unravels in the background. It gives a feeling that something has gone very wrong and you're far too late to fix it. The same feeling hits you the moment you step into Ravenholm.
That's the old passage to Ravenholm. We don't go there anymore.
In a game full of evocative and cryptic dialogue, this oddly somber and ominous line does a good job of foreshadowing the grim horrors from the usual Half-Life formula. Whatever lies ahead in Ravenholm, it's not just another firefight. Most of the time, this game is a dystopian sci-fi shooter set in a world where an alien empire has taken control of Earth. The atmosphere is bleak and full of quiet moments where the surroundings tell a story without a single line of dialogue. And then you hit Ravenholm. Things start quietly. You step out of a shed into a town that feels abandoned by more than just people. It doesn't take long to find bodies strung up on trees and hearing distorted laughter somewhere in the distance. Ravenholm is filled with mutilated corpses and the screams of things that used to be human. It's unlike anything else in Half-Life, and during my first playthrough, I struggled to make it through. But there's one thing in particular that feels different from other action horror settings, being that there's almost no ammo to find in Ravenholm. Not because you're meant to conserve it, but because there's barely any to begin with. A lot of horror games create anxiety by threatening you with the idea of running out of bullets, but Ravenholm skips the threat and drops you straight into scarcity. You're surrounded by corpses and armed with nothing but the gravity gun, forced to weaponize your environment. Ravenholm stands out in Half-Life as a meaningless plea for survival, a roadblock you need to pass through, made worse by the thought that you're not here to fix it, only to witness what's left. And that same sense of decay, of beauty rotting just beneath the surface, shows up again in another game from 2004. My friends would laugh at me when I told them I thought the Ocean House Hotel from Vampire the Masquerade Bloodlines was one of the creepiest levels I ever played. But I swear, the moment you take the key to open the hotel and the door suddenly locks behind you, I really just kind of wanted to leave. The name of the game is Vampire, so normally, you're the one in control, stalking the shadows, picking off terrified people one by one, but not in this mission. This place shows that there are things out there even more terrifying than you. As soon as you enter the hotel, you realize that the rumors of a haunting have not been exaggerated. Portraits start to fly off the wall, you can vaguely see ghosts on the other side of rooms, telephones start ringing when you're near them. Someone or something does not want you in this hotel. Exploring slowly reveals strange clues about the hotel that hint at a past that is more frightening than expected, with glimpses of more than one ghost that is haunting this place. Unfortunately, it feels like every haunted hotel in fiction has a real-world counterpart. The Stanley Hotel in Colorado is one of the most famous, frequently named among the most haunted places in the United States. It is the hotel that inspired The Shining, and guests have reported hearing piano music in empty rooms, the echoes of laughter, and even furniture shifting on its own. Whether or not any of that is true is beside the point. What matters is that these buildings feel like they remember something they aren't willing to let go of. And that's the key to these kind of locations. Psychologists like Abraham Maslow argued that our needs as humans follow a hierarchy. At the base are the things we need to survive, like food, shelter, and safety. And horror, particularly environmental horror, knows exactly how to attack those foundations. Something as simple as a hotel is supposed to offer rest, security, and privacy, but when the doors don't lock and it feels like something is watching you, suddenly even the most basic needs are threatened. You're not thinking about ghosts, you're thinking, am I safe here? And when the answer is no, the rest of the hierarchy collapses. If there's one game where the answer to that question is always a strong no, it's easily the 2018 game Subnautica. And while it might not be marketed as a horror game, that label starts to feel a little irrelevant once you're deep down in the depths with no light and no idea what might be approaching you from the darkness. At its core, Subnautica is a game about surviving, exploring, and uncovering the mysteries of a beautiful but dangerous alien world. And more than anything, it uses the isolation of the deep blue to terrify. From the safe shallows teeming with bright fish and gentle corals, to the kelp forest long shadows and lurking predators, to the suffocating murk of the blood kelp zone, every biome tightens the emotional vice a little more. But when you reach the crater's edge, the game stops pretending. This is where the map ends, the music cuts, and the water turns pitch black. And that's when the game delivers its coldest, most ominous warning.
Warning, entering ecological dead zone.
Also known as the Void, this is an endless drop into nothingness. No flora, no fauna, just an infinite lightless expanse where the ocean floor stops existing. But there is something moving in the dark. Subnautica uses thalassophobia as one of humanity's oldest fears. The dread of deep, uncharted waters where it's not always the creatures like the ghost leviathan that terrify, but the emptiness. Most horror games fill their world with threats like monsters, traps, and jump scares. But Subnautica does the opposite and strips everything away until it's just you and the crushing weight of the unknown. It almost feels unfair to include Subnautica in a conversation about terrifying game locations, because if you have even a passing fear of deep water, every single location in this game is terrifying. The horror doesn't come from a single monster or set piece, but the slow pressure that keeps building up the deeper you venture. And there are so many different places in games than the ones we've talked about in this video. It's just a fraction of what's out there. It raises an interesting question. What makes a place truly terrifying? Because sometimes it's not about what's there, but about what people say is there. Lavender Town from Pokémon Red and Blue is the perfect example. A small, unassuming town with a slightly melancholic soundtrack that, over time, became the subject of one of gaming's most persistent urban legends. Stories emerged of high-frequency tones embedded in the music that caused headaches and, in the most extreme versions of the story, suicidal tendencies. Even if none of it was real, the myth has permanently infused the location with a haunting legacy. There's a similar phenomenon that happened with Minecraft's infamous Herobrine. While not a location, this was about a supposed entity with the default Steve skin but with completely white, empty eyes. Stories and rumors claim that he mysteriously appears in players' single-player worlds, performing unsettling actions like building strange structures, digging tunnels, and manipulating the environment. These are some of my favorite examples of emergent folklore as stories that don't arise from the game's code, but the culture around it, often spread like modern ghost stories with grainy videos, screenshots, and glitches. What's fascinating is how these myths don't require elaborate visuals or narrative context. A location can be pixelated, minimal, even mundane, but if the collective imagination decides it's haunted, then, in a way, it is. If I had to choose the scariest location in Little Nightmares that isn't the Hunter's Cabin, it might actually be one that doesn't exist. Known as the Hunger Corridor, this creepy and gross area never made it into the final game. Instead, it was created by Bennu Tuli, who based the entire level on a piece of unused concept art. Despite being unofficial, it feels strangely perfect in the world of Little Nightmares. But, spoiler alert, there is a location at the end of the second game that feels eerily close to the concept of the Hunger Corridor. As you approach the game's final stretch, the world around you begins to unravel. Furniture drifts through the air, while a pink haze blankets the environment. Staircases bend from doorway to doorway, like you're wandering through a house built in a dream and left to decay. Eventually, you arrive at a quiet, off-putting room. A music box plays a haunting tune, and around it, toys lie scattered with your companion Six, twisted, oversized, and barely recognizable, is no longer just a child, but a disturbing extension of the nightmare. When you destroy the music box, the area begins to reveal its true form. The walls change into flesh like it was trying to hide the evil festering within. The entire structure shows itself as a gory mess of organs and eyeballs while you desperately try to escape a place that's less of a location and more a creature, one that has been trying to hunt you down since the very start of the game. In the end, maybe what makes a location terrifying isn't just its monsters or visuals, because the implication can be far more frightening. The sense that something here has happened, or is still happening just beneath the surface. Haunted places not just by ghosts or creatures, but by what they suggest. That safety is fleeting, that the rules are breaking down, and that some doors, once opened, don't ever really close. As always, thank you for being part of this journey. If you're looking for more existential dread or world-building videos, you can help me out by liking, subscribing, and hitting the bell icon to stay up to date. And I'll see you in the next video.